Emma pressed her phone to her ear, staring at the cream-colored envelope resting on her coffee table as though it were a live grenade. She didn't need to open it, she already knew what it was. Her friend from work had slipped up earlier that day, whispering a nervous, "Did you get it too?" Over lunch. Emma had smiled thinly, pretended not to care, but her stomach had twisted into knots the moment she realized what was coming. The wedding invitation had arrived. Her ex-fiancé, the man she had once believed was the love of her life, was getting married to someone else. Her fingers trembled as she finally opened the envelope. The words blurred, elegant cursive letters dancing mockingly across the paper. She read his name, then hers, side by side with another woman's. He hadn't wasted much time. It had been barely over a year since he had walked out of their apartment, saying he wasn't ready, saying she deserved more stability, more certainty, then disappearing without even looking back. Emma had spent months trying to put herself together, to remind herself that life went on. But now, staring at this perfect gold-trimmed invitation, she felt the old wound rip open again. She could already imagine it. The whispers of relatives, the stares from old friends, the pitying glances of those who had once expected to see her walking down the aisle in that very dress. The cruel truth was that everyone would notice she was alone. She would be the ghost at the wedding, a reminder of a broken engagement. That evening, Emma sat on her balcony, wine glass in hand, watching the lights flicker on in the neighboring houses. Her thoughts swirled. She considered skipping the whole thing. Why subject herself to that kind of humiliation? But she knew if she didn't go, people would talk even more. She had always been strong, independent, someone who didn't hide from challenges. But this wasn't just any challenge. This was personal. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was her neighbor, Daniel, asking if she wanted some leftover lasagna he and his daughter had made. Emma smiled faintly. Daniel was quiet, reserved, the kind of man who carried himself with an understated calm. He was always kind, always polite, and everyone in the neighborhood admired the way he cared for his little girl. She had never asked too much about his past, only knew he was raising his daughter alone. She walked across the hallway to his apartment, and the door swung open to reveal a warm glow of lights, the faint smell of garlic, and the sound of an 8-year-old laughing at some cartoon in the background. Daniel stood there in a simple t-shirt and jeans, sleeves rolled up, dish towel slung over one shoulder. "You're just in time," he said with a smile. "Lily insisted we made too much." Emma stepped inside, and for a moment, she felt the knot in her chest loosen. Their friendship had always been easy, light. He offered her a plate, and she sat at the small kitchen table, trying not to let her emotions show. But Daniel had a way of seeing things other people missed. "You've been quiet all week," he said after a while. "Something's wrong." Emma hesitated, staring at the fork in her hand. The words came out before she could stop them. "My ex is getting married." Daniel looked at her, his expression softening but never pitying. That steadiness in his gaze made her want to keep talking. "I got the invitation today," she continued, her voice trembling. "And everyone's going to be there. They'll all see me walk in alone. And I know it sounds stupid, but I don't want to be the tragic story people whisper about." For a moment, Daniel didn't speak. The hum of the TV and the clink of Lily's spoon against a cereal bowl in the other room filled the silence. Then Emma laughed, bitterly, shaking her head. "I almost wish I could hire someone to go with me. Just to stand beside me, to make it look like I've moved on, like I'm not pathetic. When she finally looked up, Daniel was watching her with a strange intensity. Not judgment, not amusement, something quieter, deeper. "I'll go with you," he said simply. Emma blinked. "Wait, what?" "I'll be your date," he repeated, his voice steady, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She stared at him, stunned into silence. "You? Why would you?" "Because no one should have to walk into something like that alone," Daniel said. His eyes softened, and for a brief second, Emma thought she saw a shadow of something unspoken there. "If you don't want to go alone, I'll stand with you." Emma tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. "You don't understand what it'll be like. Everyone will be looking at us. At you. They'll be asking questions, why you're there with me, who you are. And you don't owe me that." Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms loosely, still watching her. "I don't mind questions. I mind seeing my friend hurting when I can do something about it." Something in the way he said it made Emma's throat tighten. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not her ex, not anyone. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, not a line pulled from some movie. It was quiet, grounded, real. "Daniel," she whispered, unsure what else to say. "I mean it," he said gently. "You won't face them alone." Emma's heart pounded. Part of her wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle it. But another part, the part that was tired of being strong, tired of standing alone, tired of pretending she didn't care, wanted to accept. So she nodded, slowly, feeling the tears sting at the corners of her eyes. "Okay." A small smile tugged at his lips, warm and reassuring. Then it settled. The rest of the evening blurred. They talked about lighter things, Lily's school projects, Emma's chaotic week at work, but beneath it all, Emma felt a shift, a subtle change in the air. When she finally walked back to her apartment, she stood at her door for a long moment, the envelope still on her table inside, but somehow it no longer felt as heavy. She had no idea what this decision would mean. She couldn't know that Daniel carried truths of his own, truths that would unravel at the wedding and leave her in tears for reasons she could never have imagined. All she knew, as she finally crawled into bed that night, was that for the first time since the invitation had arrived, she didn't feel utterly, hopelessly alone. And that small change, one quiet offer from the man next door, was enough to set her entire future into motion. The day of the wedding arrived with the kind of cruel brightness that made Emma squint against the morning sun, as though the world had conspired to be too cheerful on the very day she dreaded most. She stood in front of the mirror, her dress hanging loosely from her shoulders, her hair pinned into soft waves that refused to stay in place. The invitation lay on her dresser, the names embossed in gold. Each time she glanced at it, she felt the same twist in her stomach, the same urge to tear it apart and pretend none of it existed. She told herself over and over that it didn't matter, that she could walk into that church with her chin high and shoulders straight. But the truth was, she was terrified. Terrified of the whispers, the stares, the smirks from those who thought they knew the story. Her ex had left her, chosen someone else, and now she was nothing more than a discarded chapter in his life. But she wouldn't be walking in alone. A knock at the door startled her, and when she opened it, Daniel was standing there. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. He looked nothing like the casual neighbor she had grown used to seeing in t-shirts and jeans. He wore a dark tailored suit that fit him perfectly, a crisp white shirt beneath, and a tie that made his brown eyes stand out even more. His hair, usually tousled in the easy mess of a single dad, had been combed neatly, though a stubborn strand still fell across his forehead. "You look," Emma began, but the words faltered. He smiled faintly, not smug but calm, as though he knew the effect he had on her. "So do you," he said simply, and held out his arm. "Shall we?" Her hand slipped into his without hesitation, though her heart was pounding hard enough that she feared he could feel it. The church was already crowded when they arrived. The grand wooden doors loomed above them, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows that painted the steps in shifting hues of red, blue, and gold. As they walked in, heads turned. Emma felt the weight of 100 eyes immediately, whispers already beginning to stir. She fought the instinct to shrink, to look at the floor, but Daniel's steady presence anchored her. His arm remained firm beneath her hand, and he walked as though the stairs meant nothing, as though they belonged there. Emma held her head high, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a shadow haunting her ex's celebration. Inside, the air was thick with flowers and hushed conversations. The pews were filled with familiar faces, former friends, distant relatives, acquaintances she hadn't seen since the engagement had broken apart. Some smiled politely, some looked away quickly, and others eyed her with curiosity. But none of that mattered when Daniel leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "You're doing great." The ceremony began, and Emma forced herself to watch without flinching. Her ex stood at the altar, looking sharp in his suit, his arm linked with the woman he had chosen over her. The bride glowed with happiness, radiant in lace and pearls, and for a fleeting second, Emma felt a pang so sharp it made her chest ache. That could have been her. That was supposed to be her. But then she glanced at Daniel, who was watching the ceremony with quiet composure. He didn't fidget, didn't glance around nervously, he simply stood there, solid and calm, a presence she hadn't realized she needed until this very moment. As the vows were exchanged, Emma braced herself for the flood of emotions, for the crushing sense of loss. But instead, she felt something unexpected, relief. Relief that she wasn't the one standing at that altar, promising forever to someone who hadn't been able to stay in the first place. Relief that she had been spared the future she once thought she wanted. By the time the ceremony ended, she felt lighter. The reception was held in a grand hall, chandeliers glittering above tables draped in white linen, waiters weaving between guests with trays of champagne. Music drifted from the live band in the corner, mingling with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Emma braced herself once again, knowing this was where the real test would come. Almost immediately, they were approached. Old acquaintances smiled brightly, their eyes flicking between Emma and Daniel, curiosity evident in their voices. "Emma, you look wonderful. And who is this?" Daniel extended his hand politely each time, his voice calm and firm. Daniel, a friend. But his posture, the subtle way he kept his arm around her, made it clear he was more than just a casual companion. He carried himself with such quiet assurance that Emma almost believed it herself. Almost believed that she had truly moved on, that she had found someone steady, someone strong. Her ex approached them once, his new bride at his side. His eyes lingered a second too long on Daniel, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Emma," he said, his tone polite but strained. "I'm glad you came." "Of course," Emma replied, her voice steady. She felt Daniel's hand rest gently against her back, a subtle gesture of support that made her feel unshakable. Congratulations to you both. The bride beamed, but her ex's eyes narrowed just slightly, as though he couldn't quite process the image of Emma standing there with someone who looked at her the way Daniel did. As the evening wore on, Emma found herself laughing more than she expected, genuinely enjoying herself. Daniel didn't hover but never strayed too far, always attentive, always watchful. When she teased him about being too serious, he gave her that small, sad smile she'd seen before, the one that hinted at something hidden beneath the surface. Later, as the night grew late and the dance floor filled, Emma stepped outside for some air. The garden was lit with fairy lights, casting a soft glow over the hedges and pathways. The sound of music drifted faintly from the hall, but here, the world was quieter. She breathed deeply, savoring the calm. A few moments later, Daniel joined her, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, tender, filled with a warmth she hadn't heard before. "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll be home soon. Daddy promised Mommy he'd always take care of you." Emma froze. The words pierced her like an arrow. Mommy. She had never asked much about Daniel's past. He had always kept his life with Lily private, mentioning school and playdates but never the woman who had given birth to her. Emma had assumed she had left, or that they had split amicably. But the way his voice cracked, the way he lingered on the promise, it told a different story. When he ended the call, Emma stood frozen in place, her heart racing. Daniel slipped his phone into his pocket and looked at her, his expression unreadable in the soft glow of the lights. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emma finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. "Daniel." Her mother. He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw it, grief, deep and raw, the kind of pain that never fully healed. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but closed it again, shaking his head slightly. "Not here," he said quietly. Emma nodded, her throat tight. She didn't press him, didn't demand answers. But her mind spun with questions, her chest heavy with something she couldn't name. The night went on, filled with music, laughter, and the blur of faces. But Emma's thoughts never left that moment, never left the sound of his voice as he whispered into the phone. She realized then that Daniel wasn't just the calm, steady neighbor who had offered to be her date. He was a man carrying a weight she hadn't seen, a story she hadn't been told. And the truth of it, whatever it was going to change everything.